Every American understands the logic of use it or lose it. Spend the money now so the budget doesn't shrink later. That's how organizations protect themselves. And it's also how a country ends up living in two different realities at the same time. You have one reality where regular people are told, we can't afford. We can't afford childcare. We can't afford affordable housing. We can't afford student debt relief, disaster readiness, food assistance without making people prove they deserve to eat. And another reality where the system can move money fast for things nobody voted on, nobody asked for, and nobody even wants, except for the people cashing those checks. Check this out.
And I promised we would hunt down the waste, the fraud, and the abuse that has run rampant in this department for decades.
Just the last 5 days of September, $50 billion was spent, purchases included $225 million on furniture, $2 million on king crab, nearly $7 million on lobster tail, and $15 million on ribeye steak.
$50 billion spent in the last 5 days of September. $25 million on furniture. $2 million on king crab. $6.9 million on lobster tails. That's not fiscal responsibility. I mean, at the very least, that's preference over our priorities. And once you see that preference, you start recognizing it everywhere. You see it on war spending that's on autopilot now to the tune of $1 billion per day. You see hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars for a DHS ad blitz where Kristi Noem gets to dress up in all her fancy costumes. You can see cuts to FEMA where disasters are lurking behind every cloud, and there's no preference there. There's no priority there. We see the same pattern with the same immoral math. This is The Quiet Lab. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share. Join our quiet quorum. Now let's count it down. Tonight, we're connecting dots across war spending, propaganda spending, safety net cuts, disaster readiness, and vanity branding because it's one pattern. And that pattern is urgency for them, but austerity for us. We hear them preach fiscal responsibility like gospel. They talk about housing relief as unrealistic. Childcare gets called a personal choice because you could just stay at home with them, right? Tuition relief gets called unfair, and healthcare is all too often called too expensive. And when they tell you to be grateful for the small fixes, you notice your bills keep stacking up. But watch the switch. When the ask is war, or money for policing, or that propaganda stunt Kristi Noem was doing with those ads, or insurance for commerce, the government suddenly starts to move. Fast approvals with big numbers, not too much debate, and a press line that basically says, this is urgent. They were going to strike now. We need to do this right away. I'm asking you to watch that behavior. Because if the country can move money instantly when power is concerned, it can move money for the people too, if it chooses to. So in the first phase of this Iran war, reporting put the early cost in the tens of billions quickly. And it's before the long tail of deployments and equipment replacement and medical care and borrowing costs, because we're not just paying for this straight up. So this is how war becomes an automatic debit, because that money is just coming. That's taxpayer funds just going right out. There's no how will we pay for it press conference. There's no filibusters about fiscal responsibility now. There's no months of hearings about affordability. It's just spending. Because war always gets a blank check faster than people with a lifeline. And here's where it gets real personal. Because war doesn't just cost lives. It quietly taxes everyone else through higher prices, higher risk premiums, higher shipping costs, higher gas prices, you name it. And this matters because if war is funded on autopilot, like nobody's authorizing anything, there's just spending, then that line about things being too expensive for our domestic survival is just a choice. It's no longer a fiscal constraint because they could do it if they wanted to. We see this. I mean, take the Strait of Hormuz, for example. Right now, it's a choke point, like a nozzle on the world's oil flow. Okay. So when they tighten it, when the Iranians shut it down, insurance companies started to flinch, shipping routes started to panic, people are getting hit. And everyone downstream now, us, we're paying for that fear of sending those ships through there to get mined or hit with missiles or whatever is happening there. So the administration's answer is a U.S.-backed maritime insurance or reinsurance backstops, or however they're explaining this now, publicly discussed at around $20 billion or so. Hear me again now, that's another $20 billion to protect the flow of oil and commerce flowing through the Strait of Hormuz for something that was Trump's fault. He was advised that if he carried out these strikes, that this was going to be one of the first tactics that they would do. He didn't believe they would do it. He didn't believe that they would wade into this war, which they did, and which they have. I'm saying that the contrast is the whole story here. If we can mobilize $20 billion just to let other people be able to travel their ships through there, then we can surely mobilize billions to stabilize the health risk out here, the housing risk out here, the childcare risk out here, and the food insecurity risk out here. We just don't treat people like we're treating this system out here that we're obligated to stabilize. They're proving the issue isn't affordability. It's priority. Reuters reported a DHS ad campaign priced at $220 million. We've all undoubtedly heard about this by now. That's just a national political messaging operation, not counting purchasing the facilities that they want to use as prison camps or any of the other things that they're doing with that money. So picture what $220 million buys in real life. That could be childcare subsidies for working parents, where both parents can get out back to work, where it doesn't have to be a choice between being able to provide for your family or getting good care and education for your children. That's more counselors in school. That's housing vouchers. That's clinic staffing. That's food programs that don't treat hunger like some kind of personal moral failing. Instead, they're buying propaganda. They're buying the story. But we've seen too many times that Trump undercuts the whole thing by saying he didn't sign off on that campaign at all. So now you have a contradiction between what DHS leadership presented and what the president publicly has disavowed. So let me be careful and clear. We saw that hearing. We heard what she had to say, and we saw her promptly get dismissed the very next day. So in a democracy, contradictions like that don't just go away. They should trigger all kinds of questions about approvals and procurement and contract bids, right? And that sworn testimony. And this matters because propaganda spending moves real quick, right? When she was dressing up like Ice Barbie and, whatever else, the money was flowing. Okay? But the truth only seems to move when we force it to. So we're going to have to do that. We've been seeing congressmen and congresswomen getting really tough with folks now when it comes to these hearings and congressional testimony. And I want to see more of it because I need to know which leaders are going to be in the pocket and which ones are going to go to the mat for us. There can be no more both sides, and there can be no more, taking money from this or this and that. We need to see now. I need to hear what you're going to say and do. And we need to see you take these people to task. And we need to know that when the gavels change hands, you're going to do what's necessary. All right? So, restrictions affecting FEMA disaster deployments during the DHS funding lapse. And Reuters reported that unions sued to block over 10,000 FEMA job cuts, warning it guts our readiness. Now, you're taking the money away from them. You're taking away the jobs as well. So there's no money to work with. There's nobody to do the work with, even if you could. Here's the real picture. A hurricane doesn't care who you voted for. A wildfire doesn't wait for Congress to move. A flood doesn't pause for a budget memo. So when FEMA can't deploy quickly enough, That gap gets filled by exhausted local first responders and underfunded counties and neighbors doing mutual aid while the government just sits around and reviews whether or not they'll actually do anything. And this is the deeper move here. If you weaken FEMA, you push disaster survival down the ladder until people at the bottom fall off first because they're literally now trying to save themselves while they're going through the disaster with no help coming from without. Now, they'll tell you they're doing this because it's efficiency. That's the reason for the cuts. But what it looks like on the ground is abandonment. Ask the people in my home state of North Carolina out there in Asheville. They've had issue after issue. And I can completely understand if your house is wiped out and then wiped out again, you're losing infrastructure and roads, and the money is trickling in really slowly. And all of the right-wing talking heads and people were trying to tell them that, oh, it was the Biden response, it was this, that, and the other. Now look at it. We see who was really holding it up. Well, let me not spend too much time on that, but that does matter, guys. It leaves us feeling stranded and abandoned. And it matters because a government that can move billions, like I said before, for war and messaging can also fund disaster readiness if it believes that we Americans are worth saving. So let's talk a little bit about SNAP. Because SNAP for so many people is a food lifeline. It's not a luxury. It's not king crab. We're not talking a lot of extras here. We're talking about food. And yet the safety net gets treated like a place to perform, their discipline talks, their bootstraps talks. Then they want to go and tighten eligibility and expand requirements and put pressure on the states. Meanwhile, so-called discipline disappears when the spending serves the interests of power and commerce. War spending gets urgency. Propaganda gets urgency. And the working public gets more paperwork. Gets to have to come in person now because they've shut down the website. They've taken down the call center. All to serve you better, right? Here's a moral inversion. People have to prove they deserve to eat, while contractors don't have to prove the spending that they have done helped anyone, or even prove that they deserve the contract that they got. And a hungry kid doesn't care about these talking points. They care what's in the cabinet, and not the president's cabinet, their kitchen cabinet. Austerity politics start by making our survival conditional. While power and their spending remains unconditional, they can do whatever they want. And we just have to see the good in it somehow. Believe that what they're doing is for the betterment of everyone else. While we see them living good, traveling good, enjoying all kinds of things, and we're wondering how we're going to continue to make ends meet, or we're watching our neighbors struggle and toil around us, and we have no way of helping them because we can barely help ourselves. So it's been reported that the administration moved to cut more than 90% of U.S. aid awards and slash foreign aid programs. Now, you can debate foreign aid. People have done that for decades. Okay? I personally think that it's a great good. You ask the people out in various parts of Africa how they would have gotten along on the epidemic of AIDS without foreign aid coming to them. Okay? So let's don't pretend that it's charity with no strategic value whatsoever. All power is not big, tough military power. Soft power is important too. And that's exactly what soft power is. Providing aid when aid is needed. Showing up around the world when people need us. That lets them know that we're there and that we care and that they can trust us. It stabilizes region and it reduces that power vacuum where bad guys can show up and move in. But when you gut that prevention, you're not saving money. You're just delaying the cost of a bigger bill later. Because if you leave that power vacuum there, more instability, more migration pressure, more conflict risk, more expensive hard power becomes necessary. And domestically, it's the same pattern. They cut programs that would prevent collapse and then spend massively trying to manage that collapse. When you cut prevention, You only pay more for each crisis every time it happens. And you'd think they'd learn. COVID was a gut punch to us all. But had our emergency management not been crippled, the response could have been so much better. Now, there's reporting on Trump banners on federal buildings, just to move on a little bit, on federal buildings and the broader naming and branding push across public institutions. This is not a normal priority in a functioning democracy. The leaders aren't just looking to name buildings and things after themselves. In a functioning democracy, institutions are supposed to outlive the politician. Our presidents are only around for 4 years at a time. We're not canonizing anybody. We're not leaving pyramids to them or anything like that. So they shouldn't be worried about getting their name on something. So anything like signage and, those big banners with Trump's name on it. I've seen banners that had, I've blocked this dude's name out of my head, Charlie Kirk, with him, pictures of him on federal buildings. What is happening here? That kind of money adds up. What they would call small spending, it adds up. While classrooms, speaking of the Department of Education, classrooms are begging for supplies and families are begging for housing. When a government spends its energy turning itself into a display to its cult of personality, it's telling you that it wants more loyalty, more than it wants any of the outcomes that they told you they were going to work for. I mean, it's crazy. So let's try to set this down clearly and carefully, all right? Under the Constitution, Congress holds the power to declare war. And the war powers framework exists because presidents historically will expand hostilities if they could without Congress clearly owning the vote here and authorizing it. So when Congress has not declared war and has not specifically authorized this conflict, there's a serious constitutional argument that what we're watching is executive war making without the authorization that the Constitution contemplated. What we're seeing is the president making war without any authorization, and there's no both sides in that issue. We can't pretend that that's normal. We can't accept trust us as a substitute for democratic authorization without congressional approval. So when the government asks for sacrifice without, us being made aware or brought into it or having our representative leadership do their job, that's not leadership. I shudder to say what I believe that is, but that's authoritarianism in the making. And if the public is paying in blood and money, Congress must own that vote and the people must get the truth. This is not the president's role. Congress has to reinsert itself and authorize this war if it is to be. And if not, somebody needs to officially say that we're not at war and stop this conflict. So here's where we are tonight. What we know is that money moves real fast when it wants to protect power, and it slows down when it would help people live. If the government can mobilize billions for war, then the we can't afford housing thing is not a fact. It's a choice. If the government can spend $220 million on propaganda and ads, then the we can't afford childcare is not a fact. It's a choice. If the government can restrict FEMA deployments and cut FEMA staffing, then we don't have a plan anymore. We have no priorities. And when sworn testimony collides with the public contradiction on stuff like the DHS ad campaign, that's telling us right away that they will not give us the answers until they're forced to. So like I've said several times before, and I'm going to keep saying, oversight can't be a weekend hobby. Not anymore. Because if the system can't answer questions while it's being stressed, then the public has to assume that it's hiding all the answers. All right. Like and subscribe, comment, share, join our quiet quorum. And as always, please stay grounded, stay informed, and stay loud. Quietly. I'm DeAnthony Collins, and this has been The Quiet Loud. Y'all take care.